Well, first of all, thank you for everyone for attending today's really special webinar with us today. Today, in collaboration with DLA Piper, we're going to talk about winning governmental contracts, all the fun things like compliance strategy and some insights for, and especially for, this is very particular, interesting times trying to navigate all the new federal landscape and changes here. All right, next slide. Oh, sorry, Eric, can you go to the next slide?
Sorry. It says screen sharing is paused for some reason.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know why though.
At Scout, we're developing an AI platform to help founders find grants, write the grants, and then with our team win the grants. And we're currently focusing on the SBIR program and just helping founders navigate through the entire process, all the way from the strategy, the writing, and all the way towards submission and eventually compliance as well. And then here we have Tom from DLA Piper, and they're expert in governmental contracts and compliance. And we have also Eric as well. I'll let them introduce themselves too. So for me, I'm Stacey. I'm one of the co-founders of Scout. Been doing federal grants and contracting for about 10 years. And we formed Scout to figure out a way to make this easier. But I'll pass it on to Eric, who can introduce himself, and then with Tom.
So yeah, thank you, Stacey. I'm also with Scout. I'm a director of partnerships, and I handle all the incubator relationships and with VCs and where we do cohort programs. My background is also in government contracting and more on the capture side, chasing RFPs, helping companies get in, in touch with the government and sell to the government. Have a long time been the vice president of the Inspiralia consulting group here in the US, where we helped a lot of startups and small businesses pitch the technology to Department of Defense, specifically or especially Air Force and Army. And yeah, I'm excited to be here today.
Thanks, Stacey, Eric, and for everyone for joining. Tom Daly. I'm in the government contracts practice at DLA Piper. DLA Piper is the largest law firm in the world, and our government contracts practice is focused on helping companies who do business with federal, state, and local government. So it's a full service practice within that group. We do contract formation. So this is why Scout and DLA Piper are such a good fit together, is we're not doing the proposal writing, that business development, the capture work that Eric is talking about, but we do help determine, are you eligible for this contract? Do you meet national security requirements? And then once the contract gets in place, we help with compliance matters. So that can be anything from understanding domestic content requirements. We're going to talk about cybersecurity requirements, other performance disputes when they arise in terms of settling a claim or a request for equitable adjustment. We help companies respond to investigations by offices of Inspector General or the Department of Justice. Also in litigation, if you do have a claim against the government that you're not able to resolve and you need to file a lawsuit, we do that all the time, as well as file what are known as bid protests, where you think your company should have won a contract, you're challenging the award as being unreasonable or in violation of law. You submit that to the Government Accountability Office or the Court of Federal Claims, or in the reverse, where your award is being challenged. So we're covering it, basically the entire government contracts life cycle, and that's really my client base, defense tech companies. I met Stacey at SF Climate Week, so help a lot of energy contractors as well, more traditional defense contractors too. But it's really a range in terms of companies that are just entering the federal market space all the way through to that top 10 government contractor.
All right. So for today, I'm actually going to jump back here one more time. So the overview we'll covering the grants 101. So how to access $4 billion in startup funding. And we'll give you a brief background on what the funding agencies are, how the SBIR, STTR program works, because that's the largest grant funding program. That's the one that we focus on today, what the deadlines are. And then Tom will take over. We talk about compliance, pitfalls, and what else, the difference between grants and contracts, because grants, as we know them, can be paid out through grants or contracts, and there's a big difference there. And then at the very end, we have open Q&As. Feel free to ask us any questions. If you have some questions, you can put them also in the chat, and we'll answer them when one speaker is off and has time to answer them. And also, if not, we just keep them for the end, for the Q&A session. If you guys are interested, we also, Scout is this product here. So we have built a grant writing platform where you can easily build grants, find the grant opportunities based on the content that you provide. So for instance, if you would upload a pitch deck or some article explaining what it is that your company does, what the science is and the engineering behind it, then our platform matches you with the most relevant federal funding opportunities. And then you also have the chance to draft proposals in there. And when you access that model, you will see the proposal generator is completely built and customized to that particular agency and that particular funding opportunity that you're chasing. So for instance, if you would get matched with an Air Force opportunity to pitch your technology to the Air Force for an open topic, for instance, which is due next week in 6 days, then that program is called FWorks. So you will be matched with that, and then in the platform you click on it, and then suddenly an FWorks proposal template is opening up, and you can build it step by step by providing the inputs, and our language model builds the entire grant for you. And also navigate deadlines, and basically what we do with Scout is we want companies to get the numbers of grants up, because it takes 5 grants to win 2. So we always say, so if you now have a model where you save time and can get more grants submitted, then that is super helpful. And that's what we built Scout on. That was our first mission. All right. So let's get started with the grants 101. So this is the situation now in the US. We have a big program called SBIR and STTR. That's basically, when I refer to grants, that is the program that I'm referring to. And I will cover that in the next minute. So for this slide, I just want to make sure that we all understand that grants are absolutely non-repayable. They are non-dilutive. They don't take any equity. And there's different sources that issue those grants. And sources could be federal grants, state grants, there's nonprofit grants, and there's sometimes private foundational grants. And we move mostly into federal and state. This is where Scout moves a lot, and especially the federal, because this is where the big grant opportunities are. We talk about $4.5 billion every year. And despite of the administration of the cuttings that we have right now, the allocation of the percentage of how much an agency has to invest into that grant program is getting higher. So we expect a similar or even higher budget next year. So this is a program that has always been backed by both parties. And since it's so big and huge, that is where we mostly help companies pull funding from. Timeline of grants that's the downside. They take a while, so it can take 3 to 6 months from an application to receiving the funds. Now, it depends if it's Department of Defense, it depends if it's some specific programs. They can be a little bit faster, but generally it takes 3 to 6 months. And we always recommend it to be an on top strategy to private fundraising. And if you blend those two, then you will basically get the most out of it, because you can really win grants. It's absolutely achievable. You just need to know where they are, and most companies don't even know that they are eligible for grants. So we covered that too in the next slide. But generally, it's absolutely feasible to win those grants. They move between $500,000 to $2 million, and the only requirement is that you present something that is aligned with the funding goals. This is the program that I'm talking about, the SBIR STTR. It stands for Small Business Innovation Research, and it's the largest source of non-dilutive R&D funding I always say in the world, because I don't know a bigger program. In the US for sure, but I think also in the world. $4.5 billion in annual funding. The way this is being spent and granted to small businesses is through the biggest federal agencies. That's Department of Defense is number one, because they allocate a lot of this money. Department of Defense, National Science Foundation, NIH, Department of Energy, NASA. So those are the major agencies that receive that fund, and they basically have to spend this money and grant it to small businesses. So small businesses help those agencies reach their R&D goals. So it's basically, you can see it like outsourced R&D from the agencies to the startup. So if, for instance, one goal would be to, let's say, for the NIH, let's go very health let's go into health life science. For instance, the NIH, if there's new therapies that they want to fund for HIV therapies, for instance, it's a very big topic. Then the NIH has to implement that, and the way it does that is by funding small businesses that innovate in that field. And this is how the money is being allocated from the federal government, from the grants to the small business. It's 100% non-dilutive, so you can keep for your full equity. And the only thing you have to do is you have to really implement what you proposed in the proposal, right? So if you propose a research plan and say, this is the outcome, this is what we want to build, then you have to try building this. Yeah, you cannot take the money and then invest it into commercial activities. So it would have to be completely R&D focused, product development focused, and it has to be as similar or as closest to, and what's the closest possible to the research plan that you proposed. And the way it's being paid out is in 2 stages. There is a phase 1 grant, and then there's a phase 2 grant. That's not to be compared with the phase 1 and phase 2 clinical trials, for example, or general pharma development. This is really just the name phase 1 is basically a small grant. That's the first grant, and the phase 2 is a bigger grant. The way this works is they want to issue your first grant first, so you really de-risk whatever you want to build in a phase 2 with the bigger fund. So a small concept study, small feasibility development, small concept development is what you will be building in a phase 1, while in a phase 2, you will be building a prototype. And not want to repeat myself too much, but here's a big 2 more different or 3 more differences between phase 1 and phase 2. One is the time. Phase 1 can take 6 to 12 months in duration. We see some DoD programs with 3 months, but typically it's 6 to 12 months. So once you get awarded, you have 6 to 12 months to implement it, to spend the money. And with the phase 2, you have up to 24 months. So some programs can take you 1 year. They might want you to work on it for 2 years, but technically you have to work on it up to 24 months duration. And the way this works is when you propose your research, you give them a time plan and you have to stick to that. But you cannot take longer than 24 months duration without getting a special approval for that. So for instance, a phase 1, we are moving between $75,000 to $305,000. That really depends. Some can go a little bit up to $400,000 with some added packages within the NIH. Phase 2 typically starts at 500,000 and goes to 1.7 million funding. That's all averages. We have some phase 2 awards over 2 million. But the big difference is phase 1 is more of a feasibility concept study where you deliver phase 2 plan, and you just want to make sure you de-risk whatever you want to build in phase 2, which is the prototype. Funding priorities this year and last year are exactly what you see here. I copied this out from the National Science Foundation, but it's a good indicator for all the other topics in all the other agencies. So Department of Defense, NIH, NSF, Department of Energy, you will see all of those could fall into those departments as well. And the National Science Foundation is basically a good agency with open topics that has a lot of these funding priorities that you see here. We see a lot of investment into artificial intelligence, machine learning, has always been a big funding goal in the last 5 years. Clean energy, cybersecurity, manufacturing, biotech, quantum, and autonomous systems is what we see being funded a lot. And in biotech and health, we have medical devices, diagnostics, also health tech and AI machine learning within health applications. So, there's a wide array of funding opportunities. And again, then you have those different agencies that spend the money and invest that money into the startups. And those agencies all have different topics in there. But overall, it's safe to say what you see here is a good indicator for all the funding priorities of the US government in 2025. We see a lot of, we get a lot of questions regarding clean energy. We see clean energy moving into Department of Defense. So there's a lot of dual use behind clean energy, and we see those topics are moving to the Department of Defense because Department of Energy is, has been investigated a lot. There has been a lot of changes and updates to the funding priorities, but typically there's a lot of clean energy funding when you just know where it's hiding, and we see there's a lot of this in Department of Defense. Who can apply to the SBIR program? You have to be a US-based for-profit small business. That means under 500 employees. You have to be majority owned by US citizens or permanent residents, or US businesses that themselves qualify as US owned. And you have to perform the work internally, which means you don't have to perform all the work internally, but the majority. So when you get a phase 1 grant, which is, I'm going to jump back here, the concept development, which is a small grant, averaging $305,000, you have a 30% limit on subcontracting. So the idea is that money that you get will be spent on W-2s, which you will be hiring once you get the award. So when you present the grant, you're presenting salaries, qualified personnel, and maybe less of materials, and definitely not as much investment into hardware. So it's very, very W-2 driven. And again, a 70% of that should be in-house. That's what a W-2 is standing for in this case. And then you can subcontract to external consultants, external R&D contractors, up to a 30%. In a phase 2, when it's between 500,000 and sometimes even $2.5 million funding, you have a 50% subcontracting limit. So it's still considered as performing the work internally, but you have to make sure that you do not subcontract too much, and especially when it comes to the core innovation. And the small business itself has to lead and perform most of the R&D because of that 70-30 requirement. And there is, as you see in the name, the program is called SBIR STTR. STTR stands for a formal collaboration, or including a formal collaboration with a US nonprofit research institution, which could be universities, for instance. In that case, if you do an STTR, you have different requirements. Then suddenly it has to be a minimum of 30% that goes to the university or more. And it all depends on, in which category you're submitting a proposal to. That said, not all topics have or are open for both. Mostly it's for SBRs, and then some of them are for STTRs. What makes a good grant is strong grant objectives. And this is basically an indicator for what is important. How you win a grant is you have to focus on novel R&D. You have to have technical risk, because those grants, the entire grant program is here to bridge companies through a very risky time when they have to demonstrate feasibility of something that's not been done before. So what they want to do is they want to fund companies, get them ready, so now they are de-risked enough for VCs to come in and invest. This is what the program is about. So they are focusing on companies that present novel R&D, that have technical risks, that have measurable benchmarks. So they have to have an idea of what it is that they want to build and what the quantifiable metrics are in this case. Like, what are the go, no-go criteria? You have to think about experiments that you will be presenting, and the outcome has to be measurable. And you're generating new knowledge. So the idea is that this also leads to IP. And here's a good and a bad example of what a grant objective is. For instance, if you develop a machine learning model for detecting chemical anomalies in hyperspectral satellite imagery with 85% accuracy, that is very specific, versus build a web app for farmers to manage crops more efficiently. So that last example would be a good SBR project, but itself, the grant objective itself has to be way more measurable. So this is just a few, tips. Now, where do you find those grants? Most of the departments have their own SBIR page. So National Science Foundation, Department of Energy, Department of Defense, National Institute of Health, have all of these addresses here. And we'll be sending you that presentation as well. So you can, you don't have to write it down. You can click on these links and you will be linked directly to the SBIR page. But then when you open it up, and the topics are mostly not right there. You would have to go into the active solicitations, which is a big PDF document, sometimes 200 pages. So it's not very, although it's designed for startups, it's not very startup friendly, in my opinion. But what we have done at Scout is we have a complete free grant matching model in there. So you can just easily sign up and provide some, some background on your company, and then you get matched with all opportunities. We pull in data from all the federal agencies, including Department of Defense, NIH, Department of Energy, National Science Foundations, and National Science Foundation. And we also include topics and all funding opportunities from different agencies that are not participating in the SBIR program, like ARPA-H, ARPA-E, and then some of the BAAs from the Department of Defense, or for instance, funding opportunity announcements that are not SBIR from the Department of Energy. So this is all in Scout. You can sign up. It's free. We used to charge for it, but we have so many collaborations with accelerators and incubators that we thought, okay, we'll just make that part free. If you want to build a grant, then in there, then you would have to get onto a paid version, but the free grant matching might be enough for many of you here. So just feel free to sign up there, and you'll be getting grant matched. And just to wrap up, the National Science Foundation's grants are actually what we consider the gold standard, because their funding priorities are very open topic. So they just say, yeah, we are interested in new AI machine learning projects, but they don't really tell you, like the Department of Defense wants an AI machine learning for this application that has to make this and this and this. So the NSF doesn't have that. It's way more bottom up. So they have a deadline, they have a topic, and then you just apply there. And you just have to know that with the NSF, it's a complete different experience. They're very founder friendly. They like early stage companies. They like cutting edge tech, and they're very open to new ideas. And I always also recommend to reach out to the program managers there, because they can also give you ideas on whether or not your program or your project is fundable. And then Department of Defense is a little bit on the other side. They are very specific in what they want, but it's definitely worth pursuing, because they account for nearly 50% of the entire SBIR funds. They invest over $2 billion a year, every year, into startups. And what they are looking for is not necessarily military applications. They are looking for dual use technologies. There's a lot of clean tech, for instance, that they like to fund. So solutions that have a commercial and defense application is what they're looking at. And as a matter of fact, in the proposals, they like to see a commercial application, a commercialization plan that is non-defense. And then they do also want to see what is possible within the defense sectors, but they do also want to know, would this be a commercial success if it's not a defense success? And startups there can really solve problems related to warfighters, logistics, clean technology, health, cybersecurity, communications, energy. It's all in there. And what's so interesting about this is that Department of Defense is a contracting agency, and Tom will talk more about the grants versus contracts. But the difference is Department of Defense gives and pays out the grants through contracts. And the way this works is, if you win an SBIR grant and let's assume you win a phase 1, then you get awarded, you execute, you win a phase 2 because you submitted a follow-on proposal to the phase 2 topic, you get awarded. Now, after the phase 2, your technology, your product, or whatever it is that you proposed is considered so customized to defense needs that if they want to buy from you, they can issue sole source contracts to you, and they do not have to RFP it. So this is where I believe the real potential is, because commercial success and obviously commercial opportunities within the Department of Defense, it can be huge, and especially for startups. And this is designed for startups. Yeah, and as a small summary, the grant application is very time intense. This is one of the downsides. It can take 100 hours per application. There's a lot of documents. There's a lot of forms you need to sign. There is potential technical errors, and some agencies, they have unique requirements, unique registrations. So if you're looking to streamline this and make it, more easy, then Scout is definitely a good way to go here. We have over 1,000 grant opportunities in there. It's a very fast process. We have US-wide grants, including federal and some state opportunities. And if you're interested, after this webinar, we can also do a quick demo on how it works. But generally, the way our platform works is you upload materials, our AI analyzes it, it matches you with opportunities that our AI thinks are most related to what you do. And once you're matched with the opportunity, you get all the summary, but also the links to the original topic places, like the original topic documents, for instance, a long solicitation. But you do get summaries in there, so you don't have to read through hundreds of pages. And that part is all free. If you want to build grants later on, you can access expert templates. There's pre-built language learning model framework in there, and it's all built on our grant writing experience. So if you identify an opportunity, and want to stay in Scout to build the application because you want to save time, for instance, then you can just click on it, build the application in there. It allows for simultaneous editing within with different colleagues at the same time. And and basically that way you can build an application pretty fast with maybe 10 to 15 hours of input versus the 100 hours. And we're not going to do the demo now, but if you're interested, then we're definitely happy to show our platform to you and show all the different steps. And I think we're ready for Tom to take over here. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen, which will be through PowerPoint. 1 second here. All right, is that coming through?
Yes.
Fantastic. So these slides, as Eric mentioned, will be distributed after the presentation. This is just a little more background on DLA Piper. My email is there. So my phone number, email, feel free to reach out on those, or LinkedIn. I'm glad to talk about any of the topics we're going to cover here today. And there's just a little bit more background as well on DLA Piper. We do more than just government contracts. We have a really great lobbying team. If you need to get in touch with somebody on the Hill or at an agency, we're able to do that, as well as different regulatory areas that you might be also running into questions about, such as environmental, data privacy, telecommunications. We do all of that. But the reason we're here today is to talk about key compliance obligations and SBIR awards. So Eric talked about the fun part. You've got the award. It feels great. You're excited about it. But now how do you actually go ahead and perform that contract or grant? And that's really the first question. So it's not just a bunch of government procurement people on a webinar saying contract, grant. It's an important distinction. There are real implications as to whether you have a contract or a grant. So in function, they're going to do the same thing. They're going to pay you money under the SBIR program to do the work that you said you were going to do in your application. But the way that it's implemented is that contracts are subject to the Federal Acquisition Regulation, or the FAR, whereas grants are subject to the Uniform Grant Guidance. So it's two different regulatory bodies, two different sets of rules that you need to be aware of depending on what you have. So you could have an award from AFWorks, we'll use them. That's going to be most likely a contract, and it'll be subject to the FAR. You'll have pages of FAR clauses that are going to be incorporated by reference. Same company goes, submits one to DOE, the Department of Energy. That most likely will be a grant. So it's going to have citations to CFR, little section symbol, and then a citation to the regulation. So same program, SBIR program, same, you could even be phase 1, phase 2, but the way that it'll flow down and the requirements, they'll differ depending on whether it's a contract or grant. Now, within the requirements, these are applicable both to contracts and grants, there are going to be a number of unique challenges and risks. So, and what I tried to do here is think of 4 general buckets to talk through. I mean, there's going to be more than just on the screen here, but we've only got the 20 minutes. So we'll start with the standards of conduct. There are laws, regulations out there on the communications you can have with government officials. If it's before a solicitation goes out and you want to talk to the agency, you want to know what they're interested in, introduce yourself, it's a great way to get a foot in the door. and do what we refer to as shaping a procurement, trying to get a solicitation written in a way that's favorable to your company, that's all right. But once that RFP or solicitation goes out and there's a identified person in there, a way to submit questions, you can't just reach out to somebody you know at the agency and say, hey, we're a great fit. We're going to submit a proposal, but just let me tell you why you should select us for the award. That's going to run afoul of a number of restrictions, potentially disqualify your company from the competition, even if you were going to be the successful awardee. It could open you up to a bid protest. So it's important to know those rules, see where the bright line is, and make sure that you're not violating it. Similarly, if you have a government official who say, you know, it's been great working with your company for the past few years. I know you've got active proposals in right now. Why don't you hire me as your business development manager? I can really help you know how to navigate the agency. There are restrictions on those type of employment discussions. You can't just hire somebody who's in a position to award you a grant. There's criminal violations that would give rise to. So when you're talking to government employees, it's not as if it's just you're talking to a counterpart at a commercial company. Government contracting is very process driven. So Eric talked about the different requirements relating to how proposals need to be competed. They need to get a number of companies interested, do it publicly, have a set response date, and the SBIR Phase 3 sole source, why that's so advantageous is you can bypass all of that, but you've got to get through the program to Phase 3 before it can happen. Typically, the government is required to get what's written into law as full and open competition. So they do put out proposals, establish a common set of requirements for everyone to submit against, review the proposals that are received, evaluate them in accordance with the solicitation, and then make an award decision. The government contracting negotiation posture, it's a very unbalanced. The government holds all of the leverage and they set the rules. There's mandatory FAR clauses that are going to be required to be in your contract, mandatory regulations that are going to apply to your grant. And if you try to take exception to those rules, generally you can say, I'm not going to comply with this requirement in your proposal, but it will result in you being ineligible for award because there are clauses required by law to be included in your contract. The government also, in disputes, they receive deference from courts. So they find that as long as the contracting officer acted reasonably or had a reasonable basis, they are entitled to make a decision, even if the court would reach a different one, as long as it was reasonable or there was a colorable basis as to making that determination, the government will succeed. So like if you think of the tie goes to the runner, to borrow a baseball analogy, the tie goes to the government and anything close to a tie also goes to the government. So very one-sided. The unique terms and conditions that will be included in your contract, there's going to be a multi-page set of FAR clauses that will be incorporated by reference. You'll just see the number, the FAR number, and that's enough for that to be incorporated into your contract as if it was written in there. There's going to be policies that you would not see in a commercial arrangement that goes way beyond the quid pro quo of I'm buying this good or service at this price. So the government has policies related to encouraging your employees not to text while driving commercial vehicles. They are policies related to human trafficking and making your subcontractors certify that they are not engaging in human trafficking, which then you have to make a certification to the government. And if any of those certifications are false, there's a number of penalties that you'd be subject to. So it's different than in the commercial setting in that the government will take policies that they deem important and that they want to attach to the payment of federal funds, and they'll write them into your contract. If you have a dispute with a government agency, you're not able to just file a lawsuit in your local state court. There is a policy under if you have a contract subject to the FAR, Contract Disputes Act, you have to submit a claim, get a decision on the claim, and then you can go to specialized tribunals or a court of federal claims here in DC. Whereas the grants, there's a different process for disputes. Agencies have different administrative steps you need to take before you can seek relief in any court. And it's important to exhaust those remedies, because that can prevent you from going into court. The government will also have unique audit rights that go beyond what a commercial party would have. You're going to need to require or maintain records for a set period of time. It's generally 3 to 4 years. Some documents need to be held longer, but those are set by regulation, and you need to maintain them. If you don't have them and then you get audited, it's a whole, it's not a good spot to find yourself in. And then the last one is the most important. If anyone joined early, we were touching on this with what DOGE was doing and how agencies have been implementing cost-cutting structures, but it's called the termination for convenience right. And that's both in contracts and grants. The government has the right to terminate a contract when it's no longer in the government's best interest. So we saw that in a lot of Department of Energy and Environmental Protection Agency grants, with the change in the administration of the agency saying this project in this disadvantaged area for clean energy is no longer in the Trump administration's interest, and then they terminate it. So it's going to be in all contracts and grants, and it can catch you by surprise if you're not aware of it. Moving to different key compliance areas. So again, I tried to bucket it, and I want to be prompt here so that I save some time for questions at the end, but we'll start with the pricing and billing. That's more of the traditional area where you could see a company run into issues with you bill for 250 hours, but you really only worked 200 hours. You have a firm fixed price contract and a cost reimbursable contract. Firm fixed price contract, you're paid for the price, but you start to bill some of those costs under your cost reimbursable. That's a misbilling case. Supply chains, you'll see these in contracts and grants as well, with domestic content requirements. So the Buy American Act, this is an area with a lot of government focus right now. Buy American Act is a cost of components test. You need to have at least 65% of your product have components that are made domestically. The Trade Agreements Act, you need to have your product substantially transformed in the United States or in a country that has a trade agreement with the United States. Under grants, there's the Build America, Buy America Act, which has a cost of components test similar to the Buy American test. The point being is you're going to have domestic content requirements in your contracts and your grants. They're going to differ depending on the value of your contracts or grants. And even sophisticated companies that have been doing government contracting for years, their business teams will mix up the two, or the three if you're counting grants, regimes that are in there. So if you're delivering products or services, it's worth going back after this webinar and seeing what is actually in your agreement. Compliance with specifications, so not just overbilling the government. You can run into issues if you are saying that your product is compliant with a certain regulation and it's not. The government has a right to demand strict compliance with specifications. So even if you think it's just as good as the product you promised, shipping that substitute product can lead to a breach of contract or to a False Claims Act, which I'm going to talk about in the next section. So they have the right to demand that you submit products or services that are in compliance with all of the specifications in the contract. The failure to do so generally will lead to what's known as a cure notice. You'll have a period of time to cure any deficiencies, after which, if you're unable to do so, can lead to a termination for default, which, in addition to not being a good thing under the contract at issue, it can affect your past performance in your evaluation of that contract, which is then used in future award decisions. The government will say, let me go into this. It's a system called SBIRs, see what other agencies have said about the contractor, and you'll have a termination for default in there, which can jeopardize future awards. Improper conduct, so that's going back to what I was talking about earlier, hiring of government officials, how you're speaking and engaging with government officials, and then some of the bigger issues of bribery, kickbacks, the things you're not supposed to do, but that people who are involved in business development sometimes do without management's knowledge. There will be labor requirements as well. I'm gonna leave that for now and move to the collateral obligation. So cybersecurity and information security, that's one area I do want to talk about, because the Department of Defense right now there are requirements that you comply with cybersecurity standards, and you have to have an assessment of that compliance. You have to post it in order to be eligible for award in a government system called SBIRS. And the Department of Defense is rolling out now what's known as its CMMC program. So starting as soon as the end of this year, in 2026, and then it rolls out in a phased way, the government is making cybersecurity requirements mandatory in order to be eligible for award. So if you are a Department of Defense contractor right now and you're not aware of CMMC, or you have questions about how you handle controlled unclassified information under your contracts, you have the DFARS 252.204-7012, or the -7019, or the -7008. Those are all clauses that you really need to be looking at now and making sure you're in compliance with them, so that when CMMC is mandatory, which is expected to start the level 1 later this year, you're ready for it, and you're not losing out on new work because of a issue with your IT systems. There also are a lot of questions that come up around security clearances and FCLs, the facility level security clearances. So personnel or FCL, if you have any questions, we have people here who worked at the government in those programs and are able to help. So this last slide before we switch to the next section is not, it's not the same flavor we've been talking about. It's not a compliance obligation, but it is really important for everyone on this call to understand what is happening under your SBIR awards with your intellectual property. So SBIR awards, contracts, and grants generally will have a patents rights clause in there that allows you to retain ownership of any inventions that you realize under the SBIR award with government funding. And in exchange for that, the government gets a license to use it throughout the government. And you've got to take certain steps to make sure that you protect your ownership rights in the patent. And similarly for the data and computer software, you retain the ownership of that under the contract or grant, but the government gets a license, and the specifics of it are going to depend on whether it's a civilian agency or a Department of Defense agency. They've got different clauses that govern this. But the takeaway is be aware of the intellectual property rights that are in your contract or grant, and make sure you're acting accordingly to preserve any rights that you have in the data or the inventions. All right, so the False Claims Act. Now, this is what really underlies the risk of non-compliances. So in a commercial setting, you violate a term or condition, it's a breach of contract, and it's the same way in the government space. But the government also has a tool called the False Claims Act, which they are aggressively using under the Trump administration to quote unquote root out government waste, fraud, and abuse. So it provides for liability for false claims that are made or submitted to government agencies and cause the payment of funds. And it can be brought by a relator, meaning one of your employees, they think something's wrong, they bring it to your attention, you say, no, nothing is, like, we're following the contract. They go and they find a lawyer, and the lawyer and that employee file a qui tam action against your company, saying company A is submitting inflated invoices to the government, and they have a incentive to do so because they can recover 30% of the proceeds. It also is a way for the government to pursue it's not just inflated costs. It could be the cybersecurity requirements I was just mentioning. You say to the government when you submit the proposal that we are going to protect controlled unclassified information in accordance with the Department of Defense regulations. Turns out you're not doing that. You don't have anything. You maybe have some passwords for your people to log on to the system. The government finds out through a relator lawsuit, and you now are subject to treble damages and a per claim civil penalty. So treble damages means literally triple damages, and the per claim civil penalty is anywhere from $14,000 to $28,000. So to illustrate that, imagine you've got a non-compliance that leads to submission of false claims, and it causes the government to suffer $100,000 in damages. Now that gets tripled to $300,000. you also have the per claim civil penalty, which is generally measured on a per invoice basis. Say you submitted 10 invoices, each $10,000, you get assessed a penalty of $25,000, so $250,000 in penalties. You're now looking at, for that $100,000 in extra costs you billed the government, a $550,000 penalty. So this is a really strong tool for the government, and the reason why I'm highlighting it here is it can totally derail a small business that's trying to get their foot in the door, trying to get into government contracting. They've got an issue under the False Claims Act, and it results in a massive payment back to the government. There also will be requirements. So this is the government, they've got that hammer of the False Claims Act, but they also make you disclose if you have credible evidence of a False Claims Act violation. So again, going back to that example of you've got an employee in your IT department saying your cybersecurity requirements are not compliant with what you've told the government, that can provide the basis. You've now got, let's say you investigate it, you find that there are some legitimacies to it, credible evidence for a non-compliance obligation that has led to the submission of false claims to the government. You would be required under FAR 52.203-13 to report that, as well as under your grants. There's a similar requirement under Section 200.113. If you look at your contracts that you already have, you'll most likely find 52.203-13 unless you're below a certain dollar threshold. So if you find yourself in that position, that's where it's really important to talk to counsel to decide, do we have credible evidence? Is this actually legitimate enough? Because you don't want to over-report, but you also don't want to ignore a mandatory disclosure requirement, because that can be the basis for suspension or debarment, meaning your company, if you're debarred, that's 3 years, you can't do any government work or subcontracting work. So it's a pretty significant penalty if you were to ignore a mandatory disclosure requirement. Now, I know I'm already over time, but I wanted to take one last slide here and think through, okay, Tom, this was a lot of information. I get that there's compliance obligations, but how can I actually implement that? And the biggest issue that I see working with companies on this is you've got the capture team on one hand, they're out there, they're paid by the amount of work they bring in, they're signing up to RFPs, they're submitting proposals, they're trying to win you work. In their requirements or in those proposals or in the RFPs, the solicitations, that may not have been considered, whether the company can actually comply with those. They may have been considered, and it's determined that we'd have to tweak a few things. You get the award, and at that point, 6 months has passed. It's been a while. People have forgotten about it. No one thinks about it when the award comes in, and then the team that's actually delivering the product or service, they're not aware of the additional requirements that were in that proposal. They don't know that they're delivering to a U.S. customer that only accepts products that are compliant with domestic content requirements. They don't know that they can't use an IT system that doesn't have certain cybersecurity requirements. There's a number of different ways that this can come up, but the biggest thing to try to streamline there is to have a structure in place so that somebody is tracking compliance obligations throughout the life of the government cycle. So at the time when they're looking at RFPs, deciding whether to bid on a no-go basis, that when it's awarded, that those requirements are being made known to the team that's going to be fulfilling it, and then making sure during performance that they're actually being met. It's not just startups that have issues in this space. There's also very mature companies that really need to build out how to make that communication flow across the various teams. So with that, we still have about 6 minutes, and I'm glad to go over the 30-minute mark for any questions.
Yeah, there is. It's also hiding in the Department of Defense because there's a lot of bases. So that would be in a DoD case, DoD funding. In this case, we would have to outline, basically make it customized to one of the military bases. That's how I would do it. There is general on sea level rise. There is the NOAA, but the NOAA had the topics at the beginning of this year, and they're only doing it once a year. And maybe Stacy, do you have any other ideas on where sea level rise is addressed in topics. Definitely National Science Foundation if the underlying tech is cutting edge.
Yeah, I think I resonate with Eric said too. DoD, DOE, NSF, NOAA. There's definitely a need for this for sure. And I think just understanding more of the technology, where do you want to go with it, and then seeing what a good fit an agency would be.
I was
So
thinking the same thing, not to just keep beating the DoD drum, but the Navy, even the Army has bases that are near water. So thinking of like working earlier this year when the switch in administrations happened, and I had clients in the solar space, and instead of talking about renewable energy or green energy, we were switching to energy security and just trying to get into that type of language that the Department of Defense is currently speaking and interested in. So I saw a question from Daniel in the March-in rights, and that relates to patents and how the government, when you do have, there's an act out there, the Bayh-Dole Act, that relates to the government rights and patents. And if you're not commercializing a patent that you realized with government funding and claimed with government funding, they can quote unquote march in and take over those rights. So it's something to be aware of. I know that there are a few cases out there, but it's not something that I'm seeing clients ask on even a yearly basis of the government is threatening to use its march-in rights. But it is a possibility, and it has happened before, but it's not a common thing under government contracts.
yes, very similar. We have done DARPA as well, and happy to assist there. I think it's about rare earth minerals, right? Big use case in the Department of Defense, also within the SBIR. So there's topics out there regularly addressing that. So let's get in touch.
Yeah, DARPA is a great one if you're able to get in with, to have that past performance as you're going forward for future contracts. It's a very well-known and respected organization within DoD. So is DIU, the Defense Innovation Unit. So different places, even if it's not a SBIR award, and Scout can help you with that, but just knowing the agencies within the Department of Defense, and it does take a while. There's a lot of them, and it's a lot of acronyms, but they are good funding sources as well. So when I think of B2C and the government funding that can be involved, I'm thinking more of like a cooperative agreement and that what that is, we talked about contracts and grants. Cooperative agreement is where the government is helping fund something where it's not a direct benefit to the government, but it's an important policy goal for the government to advance. So when you think of like the U.S. Agency for International Development, some of those were contracts, some were grants. They also had cooperative agreements for companies to go into foreign countries and hand out family planning supplies. So and I know we're going kind of high level here, Jessica, but it would look more at the grants and the cooperative agreements, which are available on grants.gov and sam.gov. You can search for them that way, but I would look for that type of funding. And then even looking at some of the companies that are already out there doing this and serving as a sub-awardee or subcontractor to them, because there will be programs where a company this was more popular under the Biden administration, gets $1 billion to run a program on behalf of the Environmental Protection Agency, and then they set up little procurements, smaller procurements for sub-awardees under their program. So it can be more challenging in that type of situation as opposed to where you're selling a product or service the government is directly interested in buying. But there are opportunities out there if you're able to run down which agency is funding them.
Yeah, and Jessica, to jump in here too, you can sign up for Scout. We also have a grant matching feature, so feel free to put in some information about what you're working on, and you'll get matches on a weekly basis to see what might come up and be more appropriate for your company.
So I in terms of specific opportunities, I don't have like look at this program, but I can tell you that the government you've hit on a few different points there. There's this whole push for American energy dominance and making America the leader in energy. There's also a push from the federal government in terms of data centers and trying to stand those up in a efficient manner where they're actually able to be powered. So we've helped clients in the past, and I'm not sure where you are in the cycle of your business, but get funding for facilities to actually build out and demonstrate how they're able to do that. So you can work with federal lawmakers, try to get that type of funding. You can work with state lawmakers. They're interested in that. They want to be able to say, hey, we've set up these AI data centers. It's going to create this many jobs. It will make this much revenue in taxes for us. And they usually can negotiate tax incentives for the data centers that you're setting up. So in addition to any areas you're currently in, talking to advisors who know the different players in various states that are interested in this can be a way to go outside of just the normal grant application way, and that gets to the lobbying way of doing it that I had referred to briefly in my opening remarks. So Stacy, Eric, are there any programs that specific existing grant programs that are out there that you come to mind?
I don't have anything right now, but this again could be another great opportunity, Casey, if you want to go into Scout, upload your stuff, and we can see what comes up. Sometimes you never know. There's just so many different opportunities out there, right? But that's definitely a need for something of this sort too. So we can definitely chat to see what makes sense for you. Fantastic. And again, it just depends on the angle too. We want to go about the narrative, right? And so we can kind of explore what that looks like. Jessica, thank you for your question. What kind of docs are best uploaded to Scout? You can upload pitch decks, white papers, whatever you feel comfortable uploading. Everything in our platform is also very secure as well too, so your IP is very safe. Whatever makes the most sense to inform Scout of what you're working on and along with the future short and long-term goals. That'll give you the best output. Yeah, great question. Right now, our platform, you upload everything as a PDF file. Whatever you think is relevant, right? It's same thing if you were to work with Eric, for example, right? How much do you give Eric for him to know enough about your company? So whatever you think is relevant for what we need to know to match you will be more than sufficient. So you don't have to do everything. First of all, I want to just thank Tom again for joining us. This has been hopefully a helpful webinar to everyone. Thank you so much for everyone for joining today. I left both Tom's and also our emails in the chat too, along with our websites, but feel free to reach out to us anytime if we can help in any way or answer any questions.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining today.
This is great. Thank you.